Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All right, tonight I am joined with Mr. Tennyson, someone that came on to my radar early on in my getting into Alterna. Producing a whole bunch of cool looking animals. I think mainly kind of from what I saw when I got into it, focused on the Waco's tank animals and avid field herpers. So thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Tennyson, or joining me.
Sure thing, my pleasure.
All right. So how was your day? Everything going good?
Oh yeah. Everything's when you're retired, every day's a holiday. Every meal's a banquet.
There you go. There you go. I look forward to that one day. That'll be a nice change. Well, what first got you into keeping reptiles, or what was your first experience with that?
Well, unlike a lot of herpers, I started at a young age. The earliest recollection I have was about 4 years old. My grandfather had a library in his house full of books and stuff, and one of them was Ditmar's Snakes of the World. And when my parents would go visit my grandparents, they would stick me in his library and lay me down on the floor with that book, and I would lay there for hours just looking at the pictures because I was too young to read. And I just was fascinated with reptiles, from that point on, and of course became an obsession. And then it just evolved from there.
Gotcha. What was your first, I guess, snake maybe you kept in captivity, or was there start off with seeing something in the wild that kind of helped get that going even more?
Well, when I was young, under the age of 10, I guess, we used to go camping and fishing a lot out in California, and I oftentimes would find a garter snake or some other, I found a rubber boa one time in the Sierras. But my parents, of course, were deathly afraid of snakes, and they didn't want me having them. But finally, by the time I was about 10, I think my parents got kind of tired of me begging for a snake and as a pet, and I wore them down long enough that they finally let me get a garter snake. And that was my first when I was 10.
Wow. Okay. And what was kind of the husbandry of that snake at the time? Do you remember?
Oh, I can still visualize in my mind what I set it up in a small glass aquarium that I bought at the dime store, and but I don't really recall much after that. I probably fed it earthworms or something, and I don't remember whatever happened to it.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. And when was after your garter snake? What did you keep working them down and get into other stuff early on, or was that basically the?
Oh yeah, no, it got worse after that. Yeah, by the time I was in my teens, I was keeping all kinds of stuff that everything that I had was field collected, because back in those days, back in the 60s, there were no herp shows, and pet stores didn't carry a lot of reptiles and stuff like that, so everything had to be pretty much field collected. And I had quite a collection going of California stuff, king snakes and mountain king snakes and rosy boas and stuff like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Have you done so most of your animals were acquired through field herping at an early that's how you got into it, really?
Oh yeah.
Very cool. Were you taking trips out to specific areas to find these, or were all this stuff kind of in a similar area?
It started. I mean, like I say, under the age of about 10, it was just from when I would go on fishing trips or camping trips with my dad, and I'd find stuff, on the trail or something, wherever we were camping. But then later, in fact, when I was, 12 years old, that would have been 1966, I was looking in the newspaper at the ads, because back in those days, again, there was no media for advertising reptiles or anything. So you had to look in the back of like Field and Stream magazine, had little articles, sometimes ads for stuff for sale. or like in this case, it was the newspaper, the local newspaper in California. I think it was the Daily Pilot in Orange County, and a guy had run an ad for some baby rat snakes for $12. So I talked my dad into taking me out to this guy's house, and we met him, and he showed us a snake room. And oh man, I was like, it was the first time I met somebody like that. He had a whole room full of snakes in his house, and just was really a cool guy. Had all these snakes. So I bought this rat snake, and then of course, I would call him from time to time for advice on husbandry and everything. Kind of got to know him, and he invited me to go snake hunting with him
Okay.
in California, road driving. It's my first experience road driving, and that would have been like 1966. And it was crazy because back then, hardly anybody was doing it. You could go out on the roads out there at night and hardly see anybody, not even travelers or anything on some of those back desert roads. And we just found snakes all over the place. It was insane. I think I counted up to 60 one night.
Wow.
Yeah, so that really got me hyped up. Plus, this guy had 6 gray banded king snakes,
Okay.
and this is the first time I'd ever seen one, and that was 1966. Nobody had ever heard of them. They weren't in any books at that time, and this guy had gone to Langtree and I don't know how he heard about them, but he went out to Langtree and had collected some and had them in his collection, and that I was hooked at that point. That was the snake for me from 1966 on.
Yeah. Wow.
Those are just the coolest of all, I thought. And so we're still friends. I mean, he's like 84 now, and lives out in East Texas. His name's David Jakes,
Okay.
and he's been around forever and a day. But he was really nice to me when I was younger, and like I say, took me out, showed me how to road drive for snakes, and that was pretty neat. Just to sit in a car, cruise down the road, and stop. There's a snake.
Yes. Yeah. I think, so many of us, we got to give credit to the one guy that, took us under his wing, kind of went, all right, you're interested in what I'm interested. Here we go.
Yeah,
And then kind of as you meet, everybody's different, but I know mine where it's kind of like that mentor, he was, not necessarily someone to do that. So why ever he accepted me into, okay, I'll teach you, I'm very grateful for. So
yeah.
that's very cool. Very cool. And so you herped around California for a while. Were you focusing for certain things, or were you just
Oh yeah, yeah,
whatever?
yeah. My target snake in California was a California mountain king snake. That was my favorite because of the colors. And um, but I was born and raised in California and grew up and left when I was 18. But up until then, I'd hunted just about every mountain range and desert that there is out there. Collected a lot of stuff, found a lot of cool herps out there. Just I found everything.
Yeah, very cool. Now out there, I've never herped out there. Is it more of a, in Texas, we're very much so about walking cuts and that aspect of it. Is it a mixture of that out in California? Is it more hiking, driving? What, or at least how
Well,
was it when you first
it's a little
started?
bit of everything depending on what your target species is and where you want to go look for them.
Gotcha.
Because you've got mountains there up to over 10,000 feet, and then you got Death Valley, lowest place in North America, um, and everything in between. So you've got like coastal plains. Um, has a lot of reptiles along the coast facing the ocean, where the temperatures are mild. You've got the high elevation snakes like rubber boas and mountain king snakes up in all the mountain ranges there. And there's mountain ranges that range from San Diego all the way up to Oregon. So there's like lots of habitat. Now I haven't herped out there in years. I live in Texas now, and like I say, I left California when I was 18. That was 1972, and I did go back to live there for about 3 years in the mid 70s. But I've only gone back just to visit a few times since then.
Gotcha.
So, but I
Now,
understand the laws out there have changed a lot to how you can herp, how many what you can and can't have, and all this kind of stuff. It's all pretty regulated.
yes, sir. Yeah, it seems more kind of like a They treat it more just like any other thing, like you're fishing or hunting,
Right.
and they kind of, it's a interesting model there.
Yeah.
Should do more to learn about that. All right. And then when was your first trip to Texas to go field herping?
That was 1977, and I was in the military, and I was transferring from Washington D.C. to Long Beach, and I specifically made a little detour out of my way down to Langtree because that's where my friend David Jakes told me he had collected some gray bands back in the 60s. So 77 was my first actual trip looking for gray bands. And of course, I didn't find anything that trip.
Did you go
But
out there thinking like you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go out there and I'll get me one, or was it?
no, I had more of a realistic idea about how things were back then. That I was going to a place where I knew very little about back in that time frame. Um, there was very little known about them other than a few people that had collected them in a few localities. Uh, but as far as that goes, I mean, I had no idea exactly where to go other than he did tell me Langtree. So I knew I had to go to Langtree. So I stayed in Del Rio and then drove up to Langtree. And, during the day I drove around looking to see where to, hunt and all that, but didn't really know really what I was doing. So more than anything, it was just a early scouting kind of trip.
Gotcha. And then when was your second follow up trip after that?
Following season, 78.
Okay, so you're right back out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, I was hooked from 66 when I saw my first gray band. That was it. That was, I had to find out more about them. And of course, there was no place to get them. I mean, nobody was breeding or selling back then. So the only way you could get them was to go collect them. So I was living in Long Beach, California, and at that time, stationed in Long Beach, and I drove to Langtree. Late May it was. And you got time for a little story
We
about
got
that?
we got all the time. It's
That was a crazy trip. My first my first real trip. Now at this point, of course, I'd studied maps about the area, and I talked to everybody that knew anything about it that could give me any insight at all, which wasn't that many people. But anyways, so I went out there, and it was a full moon, and it was like I think about the 30th of May, 78. Um, and I went to Langtree. It's right about 8:30 in the evening, and I drove up the Langtree Dirt Road, Pandale Dirt they call it,
yep.
and got up about 6 miles up, and there's my buddy Dave told me there was a sheep sign on the side of the road. He said that's
Yes,
about
sir.
as far as you want to go.
Uh,
So I found that there was an old sheep sign, had a big old picture of a sheep on it, stuck to a fence. So I said,
uh,
okay, there it is. So I turned around and started to drive back down, and I saw headlights coming up the road. Now back in those days, you got to remember there was nobody out there.
yes, sir.
So to see headlights, kind of made your ears perk up, and you kind of went on alert.
Yes, sir.
And of course, I always traveled with some firearms, and I had a 357, and I picked it up, made sure I had it on my lap and handy, and started to drive towards these headlights. And this guy pulls up in an Olds 88, and window down, arm out, cigarette hanging out of the corner of his mouth, and he first thing he says is, "You finding any Blairs?" And that's how I met John Hollister. I don't know
Oh,
if
okay.
you ever heard of him.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I met him that night in 78 at that moment. And so he's quite a character. I thought, well, this guy's kind of different. So we talked a little bit, and I said, yeah, I'm out snake hunting. He says, yeah, well, it's a full moon. And by this time it was like 2 or 3 in the morning. Wind was blowing tumbleweeds across the road. It was like, blowing 25 miles an hour. Full moon. He says, you're not going to find anything tonight. Might as well go back to the kettle in Del Rio and get a cup of coffee, and I'll tell you all about hunting Blairs. So I thought, well, that's a good opportunity. This guy seems to know what he's talking about. And during that time, he was living in Del Rio.
Yes, sir.
So I said, and back then I used to smoke cigarettes. And so I says, okay, well, listen, I'll give you courtesy of the road. You head on down. I'll sit here and have a smoke and then wait about, 10 minutes and then follow behind in case something comes out. So he says, okay. So he heads on down the road and I'm smoking a cigarette. By the time I put it out, I get back in my truck and I didn't go 10 feet. And there's a snake crawling across. I don't know if you've ever been on Pandale dirt, but
Yes, sir, I have.
the road graders occasionally will grade it to
Yes.
smooth it out, and they push like a little ridge of dirt up on the edge
Mm-hmm.
that sticks up about, I don't know, about 18 inches up.
Yes, sir.
And there's a snake. I just see a black line of a snake crawling over the top of this into the road. And I, of course, went into full panic mode, slammed it in park and jumped out and ran over. And it was a gray band.
Oh, wow.
Back then, yeah. Back then we called him Blair's. It was a Blair's face king snake.
Yes, sir.
And man, I mean, my heart is just pounding out of my chest. I could still see Hollister's taillights ahead of me. And, to this day, I never did tell him that was the night I found my first snake, was the night I met him. But it always had a special place in my heart that, I found that Alterna also the same night I met him.
Yes.
So I bagged that Alterna and I'm shaking. I'm shaking because I'm thinking, okay, do I tell this guy or not? So I drove on into Del Rio, met him at I think it was, what the hell was the name of that place? The Kettle. Yeah, the Kettle restaurant. Okay. So I met him in there and we sat and we're drinking coffee at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, I've got this Blair's king snake in a bag out in my truck. And all I wanted to do was go back to my hotel room and pull it out and look at it,
Is it real? Is it still
there?
Yeah. It's still there. It's real.
And the whole time he's telling me, all about his, snakes that he's found and where to go and all this stuff. And we hit it off pretty good. I think we got along pretty good after that. But that was my first one.
Wow. Wow. And Pandale Dirt, in my experience, kind of hunting that road, it doesn't seem very conducive to seeing a gray band,
No.
And so, but I think too, that's in my mind, at least, that I have this like, oh, gray band, and I know it's not true, but just when you think about it, or when I think about it, like, oh, gray bands live on rock cuts. Well, no, they don't. That is just our little TV screen into their reality.
Yep.
And every once in a while, we see one pop out cruising from point A to point B, either by accident or trying to get to where it's got to get to.
Yeah.
So, but they live in those hills. That's what they were before someone blew a hole in it and put a road down the middle.
Well, my theory about that is, and it's just theory based on, about 45 or so years of collecting out there, is that I think they inhabit the entire Chihuahua Desert region. I mean, from east of Del Rio all the way to El Paso, and and north into all the counties above that. But I think the population density changes based on food source and habitat. So what I'm saying is, I think you can find them anywhere, but you can find more of them in places that have more food and habitat to support them, and less in areas that are more desolate.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And then of course you always, you got the conditions too, rainfall and temperature and all that stuff. But yeah, you're right about Langtree. I mean, when you look at it during the day, there's nothing there. It's flat. There's hardly any vegetation. There's hardly any like rocks for them to hide in or anything. But, they're there. Well, also, I think there was a lot more of them there early on. And then we had like some really severe droughts over the years. And that area, I think, kind of dried up a little bit.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, and that's one thing too, is that limestone goes down, what is it, like 600 feet in some areas?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so who knows how those animals are living through that, and what that looks like in there,
Right.
So the idea of, I think, kind of almost tangenting off here for a second, but the way we kind of look at locality being so specific to, oh, this cut here that's maybe 1 or 2 miles away being so distinct from the other one, I don't think that's necessarily the case all the time, and I think that you probably see, breeding between those two areas and animals expanding into those areas,
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know. I
Well,
think
long
that
talking about that also is a good time to bring up another theory that I have,
mm,
but it's really based on a guy's paper that he wrote about banded geckos in California many years ago. The state was going to put in a new stretch of highway, Interstate 15, from LA up to Las Vegas. So they had to do a lot of environmental impact studies before they could start construction. And I remember this guy. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember the guy's name, and I don't remember what university he was out of. But he wrote a paper about the banded geckos because one of the questions that came up was, if they put in this highway, are they going to kill a bazillion of these things crossing the road and decimate the population?
mm,
That was what a lot of the environmentalists said and were feared. So he did the study. It was really interesting. I don't know if you've ever been out to the Mojave Desert, but some other deserts are similar. Do you know what a um, creosote hummock is?
just kind of like the bushy little plant.
Yeah,
that,
it's a creosote bush,
okay.
and um,
No, I don't. We'll do it like that. So I think it's better if you explain it anyway for the people that don't, and then me just instead of assuming I do know.
okay, um, it's a bush called a creosote bush,
Yes, sir.
and the roots of this thing hold the sand and dirt together around it. So as the sand sometimes shifts and erodes due to the wind,
Mm,
it actually leaves like a little mound.
okay.
Just never usually more than about a foot high mound, and then the creosote bush growing out of the top. And around the edges of this mound, you'll frequently find rodent burrows. Kangaroo rats, I think, would burrow in there. So if you would walk around at night and flash a light in these little burrows, almost every, and I did this to just after I read this paper just to see if it was true, every single hole would have a little banded gecko right at the mouth of the hole at night waiting to ambush insects. And there are literally thousands of them. I mean, you just, as far as you could walk and see, every 10 feet was a creosote bush. And you'd see it, if there's a hole, you flash your light, there's a gecko. So he wrote about this. And then what he did was he would mark all these spots, and then he would collect the geckos that he found in these holes. And then he would come back a short time later. I don't know if it was the next night or a week or whatever, but what he found was every single hole had a gecko in it again. And he did this over and over and over, and every time there were geckos. And what he um, decided was that there's a much higher population of these things out there than he was seeing.
Yes, sir.
And the dominant geckos had the best ambush points, which were the mouths of these burrows. So soon as one was vacated, the next in line would jump in and take it over.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to read about that because it made me think about a lot of times people say, well, yeah, we're over collecting these cuts out in West Texas and we're going to catch all the gray bands and all that. But I've gone for like 40 plus years, year after year, and caught alterna on the same cuts.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And so I think this guy was onto something with these geckos. I think there's a lot more animals in some of these areas than we see. Just going back to like what you said about the limestone going down 600 feet, there's probably way more out there. And um, as you take some that you see crawling around at night, I mean, it's possible that there's smaller ones that want that area too,
Yes, sir.
and,
Yeah.
and come out and take it over later. And that's why you keep finding them.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think that's, while an upside, while a downside in some ways, but very much so an upside when we think about, reptile conservation over time in Texas, that the majority of Texas is private land. So we don't have access to a lot of that.
Right.
And so that we see these animals funnel through and come out and start looking. One of the early kind of I acquired Ray Duncan's collection. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, something like that. I don't know if you're familiar with the gentleman.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Well,
And
I know him not real well, but yeah.
yes, sir. Yeah. And, one of the things he was telling me is he was saying, hey, when these hatch out, one of the main struggles that you have is going to be getting them to eat, and it's a real nightmare. And he said, but you're going to notice that, a portion of the clutch is going to want to eat this, and a portion is going to want to eat that. And I think over time, with my limited production that I've done, that checks out. Where some of these animals are going to come out and they're going to smash pinkies like it's not a problem, frozen, live, whatever. And then some pop out, and I'm there for a year tinkering with them to try to find what that animal wants, and ends up being Mediterranean geckos, or whatever it is.
Right.
However I end up getting that animal to eat. So with that, extrapolating from that idea, of course it makes sense that these animals are going to pop out and then they're going to disperse just like with
Right.
anything else. And is that, and then it gets back to, maybe it's not just limited to one thing here, but multiple things where we go, you know, we see them where we see them because, that's them just pushing through to try to kind of expand, or, we just catch that animal and it accidentally popped out that hole, or that's its nightly routine and that's its route that it runs all the time.
Well,
We just happen to be there.
well, yeah, yeah, at the right time, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that these animals are a lot more intuitively, um, I don't know, intelligent in a way than we give them credit.
Mm.
And I think that once they establish a little territory, I found Alterna, um, like the same one 2 years in a row in the same spot.
Yes, sir.
And so that made me think that, well, some of them may not go far as long as there's a good food source, and they have a place to hide and to winter over during the cold months. And I know there's a lot of other reptiles that are pretty territorial too, like that, and they're a lot smarter than you think. You think that they're not really smart, and if they wander off, they're not going to find, their den or their spot or whatever. But I mean, they do,
Yeah.
and I think Alterna are really no different.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, it's so interesting. Some people have a very strict stance on the intelligence of reptiles and what they think it is, right?
Right.
And while I respect that, and there's validity to that, I think that if we just because the animal isn't smart in the way we would rate a dog being smart, or this or that, or the way those other things would be considered smart, the animal, to your point, is very adaptive to its environment, and it's smart in that way, of course, right? Or they
Yeah.
wouldn't still be here. And so I think that we kind of mix those two things up, and we don't give them as much credit as they
Right.
deserve in that way.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Interesting. Okay, cool. And then when was your second Alterna?
Well, I think it was the following year, '79. I went back,
Oh wow. Okay.
and
You're knocking it out of the park.
oh yeah, no, I went every year after that, and then it even got worse. I started going like, 6, 8, 10 times in a year. Once I moved to Texas,
Yes, sir.
it's just about a 6.5 hour drive or whatever.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So yeah, it was '79. I went back, and I picked up two on Pandale Dirt. I went back to Pandale Dirt, and back then it was road driving was about the only way we knew how to collect it. Nobody was spotlighting cuts back then, or if they were, they weren't talking about it.
Yeah.
But road driving and driving on the shoulder in front of the cuts was the only way that we were finding them back then. And I feel like such a dumbass sometimes that I wish I would have known about shining cuts, because I would cruise those shoulders right in front of the cuts, up and down 90.
Yes, sir.
And if I would have, and I had a big flashlight, I could have shined the cuts, and I probably would have found a way more, but I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
But I found two on Pandale Dirt. One of them was almost the same spot where I found my first one. I was going up, I think they used to call it Blair's Hill. It was the first big hill going up Pandale Dirt. And I was driving along, and, just a dusty little dirt road that's easy to spot anything. You could see a bug crawling across the road. You know, it was so light colored.
Yeah.
But I'm driving along, and I'm driving slow, real slow, and there was something on right on the edge of the road. It was kind of dark, squiggle looking thing. I mean, it looked like a piece of fan belt or something. And I drove by it, and I thought, wait a second, something went in my mind. I better go check that out because because it just looked like a little black piece of rubber or something. I got out, and sure enough, it was a dark phased Blair's.
Oh, wow.
And that was my first experience of seeing that they don't really shine up real well in the light. I think their scales are different than most snakes, and they don't reflect light real well. So that's why they show up kind of black on the road. So yeah, that was my second one, and then I think it was on the same trip, but not the same night. Right at have you been up Pandale Dirt, right past Chamberlain's gas station?
Yes, sir. I have been. I have never done the complete loop, but
Uh,
I have been up it. And yes, sir. And that sheep sign that you're pointing out,
yeah,
the group of guys that mentored me in herping out there, um, they were familiar with that from when they first started herping. So I'm familiar
yeah,
where the sheep sign. It's not there anymore, but where it should be.
right.
Familiar with that. Yes, sir.
Well, right when you start on the dirt road, it kind of you go through, I think, a cattle guard and a
Hmm.
little bend in the dirt as it starts to go up that Blair's Hill. And I caught a nice big light, not a big, but a subadult light phase right there crossing the dirt road.
Well,
So that
that,
was, I was thrilled because this was my second year and I caught two this time instead of just one. So yeah, I was pretty happy about that.
yes. Yeah, after that first one you see, right? You're like, this is such, an amazing rush
Oh yeah.
that what if I never feel this again? And then you find the second one, and it's
Kind
like,
of like being like a drug addict or something. You got to
yes.
got to keep going back to get that high or that rush.
Yes, I mean, there's nothing better, right? I think that's
Yeah.
something that's kind of a common thread between, I think there's a difference between being a field herper and, people that have a broad kind of spectrum to what they're looking for. And maybe they're going to different areas to find different species. And it's
Yeah.
about how many have they found, you know, that's cool. I,
Yeah.
I wish that got me that tickled my fancy like finding an alterna does.
Yeah.
But for me, I am more than I am a herper. I am an alterna hunter. That's what I am
Yeah.
looking for.
Exactly.
Where it all plays a culmination into it. Where I think, I was listening a while ago and they were talking about elk hunting, right? And guys that are
Yeah.
successful every year, and that's kind of early on what really made me think differently about field herping and how to go about it. It wasn't this, I don't know, kind of throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. And
Yeah.
and there is some data you can bring into it that
Right.
we're playing a percent game here. And
Oh yeah.
so that, okay, cool. You have a 1% chance to do this here. But I think if I go here at this time for this reason, at this, I think I have a 5% chance.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do that. And that was a game changer in my alterna hunting time. Where it's like, okay, now I'm finding alterna. Okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Once I started piecing together a lot of the little details and doing my detective work and you know putting it all together, that's when I started realizing there is a little bit of a method to the whole thing.
Yes.
That you want to get the weather has to be right, temperature has to be right, preferably dark of the moon, but that's not 100%. Recent rainfall is helpful, and of course, time of the year. And when you get all those factors together and get that perfect situation, it still doesn't guarantee you're going to find one, but I think it ups the odds
Well,
that
when
you
it's like
will.
that, the way I look at it is an alterna moved that night and it popped out somewhere.
Yeah.
I just wasn't there. So
And
I have
that's
I know I'm where I should be. It just
yeah.
didn't happen in front of me tonight.
And that's what also that led me to a lot of this because I've walked cuts before and not found anything on my first pass of the cut. Turn right around, start walking back just 10 minutes later, and there's an alterna.
Yeah.
And a question, of course, pops in my mind: did I miss it walking by, or did it just come out? And I think in most cases they just came out because then I've over the years I've found situations like that where they're crawling on cuts and they disappear, and 10 minutes later they're out again.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So, and then I met Hollister. Well, for every year after that, I was going there. We became pretty good friends, and he would teach me. He was really free with the information, and where to go and how to catch them, and all that. He was a real character. Did you ever meet him?
No, sir, I didn't. But he was the gentleman that taught my my early the first guy I ever worked under at a pet shop. It was his pet shop I worked for, and I believe that Hollister was the first guy to take him out.
Oh,
And
really?
so, yes, sir, yeah. So I think a lot of kind of my understanding of West Texas and that
Yeah,
early on learning was from that. And then the guy that was the first person to take me out to West Texas worked at the same pet shop when he was a younger gentleman, and so it all kind of expanded from Hollister's my
yeah.
understanding.
Well, he taught me a lot,
Yes, sir.
and we spent many nights back in those days. We had CB radios,
Okay.
and we would take separate cars, and his handle was Nightcrawler,
Okay.
and
Pretty cool.
mine was Body Snatcher
All right. All right.
because I was an Army recruiter at the time, so that he called me Body Snatcher. So we would be driving up and down 90, calling the you know Body Snatcher and the Nightcrawler, and we had a great time. And we'd be cruising all up and down 90, and we'd, of course, anytime we saw anything, we'd relate what we saw. And my buddy I told you about, Dave Jakes, that started me on all this. Um, by this time, um, he wasn't getting out too much anymore, but he wanted some Pictogaster.
Okay.
And so I told Hollister, I says, hey, I says, this buddy of mine back home wants some Pictogaster if you know of a place. And I'd never seen any out there at up to then. And
Mm.
Hollister says, oh, I know where to get Pictogaster, Palmadraw, just follow me out. So one night we go out there, we park our cars, walk over just a little rise on the side of the road and down into a little gully. And this gully wasn't 10 feet wide. I mean, it was just a little sand washed gully with a lot of brush, a lot of thick brush. I mean, up to our shoulders and brush and stuff. And we're walking around in this little it's kind of a tight little area, tight little wash. And of course, we had the old style flashlights, the kind that use the square batteries that you buy for like $2 at the hardware
Okay.
store.
All right. All right.
That they
Yes,
put out
sir.
like a yellow light.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
And they weren't great, but that's all we had. And so we're walking around, and then he says, oh, there's one, and he spots one, and this thing just takes off like a uh, Coach Whip snake. I mean, just and it's out of the light, gone
Yeah.
from the dark.
Yes. Yes.
And we're going, crap, we missed it. And then all of a sudden, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another. Oh, there's another. We saw like like about 6 or 8. I mean, we were standing in like a pit full of Pictogaster.
Yeah.
And I guess they had kind of accumulated in that area because it was the closest thing to water that they're going to find in that wash area. I guess I'm not sure what brought them all there, but boy, there was a ton of them, and they were just all over. And I remember one shined it right down by my feet, and it just ducked out into the dark and disappeared. The next thing I knew, it had crawled up a bush and was like almost on my elbow, was standing there. My elbow was right up against it, and it was coming out in this branch. And
Yes.
I'm panicking, thinking I'm going to step on one or get bit, and they're all going to attack us. And you know, but we ended up collecting, I don't know, 2 or 3 of them that night. But it was just amazing. Hollister, he knew where to go to get just about everything out there.
Yeah. Yeah,
He
and there
spent,
definitely is. There
yeah, he
definitely is
spent a
kind of
lot of
ranges.
time out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And unfortunately, no, I never did get to meet him, and I wish I would have, but no, sir, I didn't. And that's one of those, it's interesting, right? Like pics pop up in the most random places. Like some spots make sense where you're like, okay, here we go. There's a dry
Right,
riverbed,
right.
makes sense. But I found them in the Christmas Mountains before. Was it west of Sanderson, going towards like 9 Mile and stuff
Yeah,
like that? Find him over there. Where that was the first time I ever saw one was over there as a juvenile animal, And it's just like, why are you here? Like, I get it, but I think of you more around water, and
Yeah.
there's
Well,
nothing.
I can testify to that. I've almost every cut I've ever walked in Terrell County, Pecos County, and Crockett County, I've found Pictogaster. Almost every single cut.
Yeah,
Some
that
of
makes
them
sense.
only one or two, and some of them, 8 or 10. But
Yeah,
they're all over the place.
yeah,
There.
yeah. It's very weird, right? Because they're spread out. Especially, yeah, you're right. Especially around Sanderson, I've found them pretty far out.
Yeah.
Like that. I don't know where it would be mile wise, but that really big kind of cut where it's on the if you're leaving Sanderson on the
Going
right
east,
side of the road. Yes, sir.
east,
Yeah,
the big tall white cut 5 Mile hill.
yeah,
Just
right. Okay,
past on
so
the other
five
side of
mile.
Pecos River. I know it. I know every
Yes,
rock on that.
sir.
I sent you an in situ of an alterna on that cut.
Okay, excellent. I'll try to throw it
Yeah.
up around this time and then let everybody see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Pics are a weird one. It took me a very long time to see one, and then after I saw them, I'm like, okay, I've seen plenty
Yeah.
now.
I found them all over out there. But that's another um, piece to that puzzle about distribution out there of herps. I really do think they're all over the place out there. They're just more scarce in areas that are not suitable.
Yes, sir.
I one time there's a stretch of road. I'm trying to remember. I think it's between Comstock and Del Rio. There's like a big long, I don't know, 20-mile stretch of just nothing but flat desert. I mean, just nothing, just flat. And I found a DOR Alterna out there one night, out in
Oh
the
wow.
middle of nowhere.
Yeah,
So I know they're all over the place. They're just some places are more common than others.
yeah. But then again, that makes sense. We hear about animals being found in Bracketville. Um,
Yeah,
I think they spread out, but yeah, your percentages get lower and lower. I think that, that kind of Comstock, Juneau, Sanderson area, I think, it seems to still be very productive. And if I, gun to my head, go find Alterna, the quickest I can is going to be that area, and then, but, for me now, there's a couple areas where it's like, I don't know of any being found in that area, but that's what makes it interesting for me is I want to go find one in one of these spots where, no one, not many people have.
well, that's what I started doing about my last 10 years of hunting out there. I
Yes, sir.
started looking for areas where I knew they would be, but nobody's found them.
Yeah.
And those are the places I used to like to hunt for them.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I have a glass mountain animal
Oh,
that
that's a good one.
yeah, that I found that just still I that man when I saw that snake nothing came in my mind. I didn't care if there was a cactus in front of me. It didn't matter. I just jumped,
Yeah,
and just grabbed it. I'm glad that cuz every once in a while, you see a nice light colored lep and that's a nice light alterna gets me going,
oh
minimal
yeah.
red, just black and gray like oh man I love that.
I've almost grabbed baby leps before, thinking
Yeah,
they're alterna.
right.
You know, they were up on cuts, and all I saw was the gray and the bands, and maybe their little button was hidden or something in a crack, and all I saw was just that gray and black bands, and I reaching for it, and right at the last second, I identified it as a lep.
Yes, yes, sir. Yeah,
And
I didn't really get much too nervous about that until the first live Alterna I ever saw out in West Texas. I
yeah,
saw it and it shot down a hole
oh
and
no,
was gone.
yeah,
And I was after that, yeah, if I see an Alterna, it does not matter. I am jumping, diving. That animal is in my hands. I don't know if you'll ever see an NC2 picture from me because I am not messing with that. I'm grabbing it.
well,
Well,
my first milk snake I ever found out there. It was late at night, and I was just driving into the area from Fort Worth. Been driving, all the evening just after I got off work, and I saw just a little black ribbon on the shoulder of the road, crawling up toward a bunch of big rock, rocky, broken rocks and boulders, and toward a cut. And of course, I couldn't tell what it was. It was just kind of dark, so I knew it was a snake. So I parked, I stopped, got out, I ran over there, and I saw red. And I thought, crap, I couldn't, and it was moving. I don't know if you've seen a milk snake crawling fast, but the colors kind of blend. It's hard to
Only
really
in
gauge.
South Texas. Only in South Texas, and that one was chilling.
Yeah, well, I thought it could be a coral snake or something.
Uh,
Because the colors were blending together, and I knew there were corals out there, and I thought, crap. But it was like one of those things where if I didn't grab it, it was fixing to go under a boulder, and so I just said, screw it. I reached up, and in fact, I had to go up under the edge of the boulder a little bit and blindly
yes,
because it was
yes,
getting away.
yes,
And I
yes.
grabbed it and pulled it out, and it was a milk snake. Thank God.
Yeah. That'd be a fun one to explain to the wife or significant other at the
Yeah,
time, going, well, it could have been, and I had to do it. They'd be
yeah.
like, you're
Oh
such an
yeah, yeah.
idiot.
That was that moment of stupidity where nothing mattered, like you say, cactus, whatever,
Yes, yes.
as long as you get the snake.
Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, stories for other times. I've
Oh
made many
yeah.
mistakes when it's, the last couple nights of the trip and I'm like, I don't care anymore.
Oh yeah.
It's
I,
just about this. That's how you step on a rattlesnake, but
yeah. Oh,
that
I
was
think
a
I got all kind of stories like that out there.
yeah, it's always a problem when you're walking and it's that, shell kind of thing and you hear it
Yeah.
crunching and then all of a sudden it feels like you stepped in dog poop and well, it's not dog poop, it's a rattlesnake and
Yeah.
you oh crap.
Oh yeah.
Well, to get back kind of what's your experience with herp shows over time? What was your first one like and have you ever vended them and
Oh
what was that
boy. I
like?
think my first herp show was when I just had moved to Texas. That was in the 90s. And I think it was one of the first herp shows in the DFW area. Trying to remember. I think it was held at a La Quinta Inn in Arlington. Yeah, Arlington or Irving. And that was the first, reptile show I'd been to. And I thought that was pretty cool. Uh, and they, developed after that. And then, of course, as I was producing animals, I started vending at the shows.
That first show that you went to, do you remember kind of what was there, what it looked
No,
like or
I
no?
don't. That was like about like I said, the mid 90s. And I've slept a couple times since then. So,
Understandable. Understandable. All right. And then you said you started vending shows after a
yeah,
while.
I don't remember. Let me think. Uh, I don't know if I started vending in the late 90s or close to 2000, somewhere thereabouts. When the shows started popping up more frequently, there was one that would show up regularly every couple of months or so in Arlington. Um, and then there were some of the bigger shows that would pop up every now and then. Then, of course, NARBC started coming twice a year. And uh, so I started vending at all of those.
Gotcha, gotcha. And what was that like for you? Vending them. I
Well,
mean,
just,
sorry, go
huh?
ahead. No,
Oh,
no,
just
go ahead, go ahead.
mixed mixed feelings about those shows. Um, I would for a long time. I mean, I was breeding nothing but gray bands and milk snakes, and I had some nice ones. And I would go to these shows, and I put all this stuff out there on the table, and I was the only one in the shows that had gray bands and milk snakes for years. So I kind of had my own little market. But it was funny because some people that didn't know about milk snakes or gray bands, they would come by and they'd look at them. Oh wow, that's really cool looking snake. Uh, let me. I'm going to walk around but I'm going to come back. And then 20 minutes later, here they come walking by with a ball python.
Yes, sir.
And I would think, what? I don't get it. But what I realized, and somebody else coined the term deli cup herper.
Yeah.
And then I realized there's a lot of herpers out there that don't field collect at all, don't know anything about field collecting, never been field collecting,
Mhm.
wouldn't know the first thing about field collecting, but they know what they like when they see it at a show or something. And they want to just have a cool looking pet.
Yeah.
And I think, like a little 8-inch Alterna, big around as a chopstick, for $300 wasn't as appealing as some snake that was maybe a couple of feet long and chunky and eating rats.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too we see that kind of ebb and flow in the reptile world, right? Where for me, I know in the beginning, uh, you know, I bred ball pythons, did all that. It was fun and cool. And then as I got older and got into field herping, especially, gray bands took over my life. Where
Yeah.
that's the majority of what I keep, and the thing I find the most interesting is that. And so, and the hobby in general seems to kind of over time ebb and flow. Where I think there's a lot of overlap in general exotics, and you would see at a certain point we would be selling a ton of tarantulas at the shop I worked at, and
Right.
then all of a sudden, you wouldn't sell tarantulas for 6 months, and
Yeah.
then it'd be on to whatever movie came out where it was a day gecko, and oh, everybody wants that, or a
Yeah.
commercial or whatever. And I think colubrids have kind of lost some of their popularity for a while there, and but I think that there's definitely a resurgence in the appreciation of that.
Well, I think though, like for some of us older herpers, where the only way we could get some of this stuff is to go out and collect it, it added a different value to it when you looked at it. Like when I look at an Alterna, all of a sudden I get a flood of memories of climbing around rock cuts and stepping on cactus and, all this kind of stuff. And it increases the, what do you call it? The intrinsic value
Yes, sir. Yeah.
of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody just walking along through a pet store or a reptile show and just seeing this little snake in a deli cup, they don't get any of that. All they see is a cool looking snake,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Well, and there's different levels of keeping. I think that
Yeah.
with the business that we run, we get to see a lot of people where they have one pet snake, and that person is passionate about that snake that they have,
Right.
but not in a broad spectrum. And as we see the hobby expand to where it's not such a niche thing, where it's like, weirdos like us dedicating as much of our life as we can to going out and walking around and finding stuff, in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere. And it's, soccer mom Sally that got, Jimmy's little, pet ball python. And
Right.
that's what, they love. They love, Samantha the ball python,
Yeah.
and that's the extent. And it
Oh yeah. When you have to go out there, sometimes year after year and night after night, trudging along those cuts and shining and looking for those things, and then maybe score one alterna, it adds a whole different value to
yeah,
it.
yeah, yes sir, yeah, it does. And I think that, so to get back to field herping and kind of going on with that, something you brought up earlier is that, yeah, hey, after a while, and I'm paraphrasing here, but after a while, the easier localities maybe weren't as interesting to you, and you started hunting those harder ones. And correct me if I'm wrong here, and at least what drew me to your name, and why I'm like, oh, I know this name, was your Wacos tank animals. Were those
Oh yeah.
animals that you collected and
No,
that?
no, they weren't.
Okay.
Um, there was a fella out in El Paso. Uh, Man, and I'm having trouble remembering his name. Is years ago, but he went out there and collected them, and then I got them from him. And I hunted the Huecos, but I never was successful out there.
Okay. Okay. I've never been out that far, but
It's a
I
nice little area. There's a nice little group of cuts. But the thing is it's a long ways for me.
yes, sir.
To go out there, takes twice as long to get there than it does, Sanderson or Langtree in that area. So, that wasn't the kind of, I didn't make as many frequent trips out there as I did the closer areas. So,
Gotcha. Yes,
but
sir.
that's where I got all my stock was originally wild caught stock.
Okay. From that gentleman that he
Yeah.
collected. Okay. Excellent. And so you kind of over time, how many generations deep did you get into that line?
Of the Wacos.
Yes, sir.
Oh gosh. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and dig through my records. Um, but I bred them for several years.
Yes, sir. Okay.
So, and I raised up several and, rebred them. So it's at least, I don't know, several generations.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. And then what were the traits that you saw in those animals compared to the first animals that you saw? What did you see, and what were you trying to bring out in the line that you were working with?
Which been the Wacos or
Yes,
others?
sir. Well, I
The
guess Waco, that's just, I mean, and please expand on that. I'm just talking about my limited knowledge of you and kind of your breeding projects over time. So I'd be interested to hear about anything.
well, the Wacos I like because they they had the light gray and the narrow black bands. They were classic Alternaphase.
Hmm.
Um, but occasionally some would turn up with a little bit of orange. When I was breeding, every now and then I'd have a clutch of 6 or 8, and one would pop out, not quite a Blair's phase, but pretty close with a lot of orange. Um, and that was kind of interesting. That led me to kind of another theory I started developing over time because I hunted, everywhere from, like I say, from the Wacos all the way down to, Langtree. Um, it seems like, well, I know early on, a lot of guys were saying, well, there's, you only find Alternas in, the western part of the range, and you only find Blair's phase in the eastern part. Well, over the years, after hunting a lot of different places, I found them all over.
Hmm.
But some areas you find more Blair's phase, and some areas you find more Alterna phase.
Yes, sir.
So, and then after breeding, I've bred thousands of Alterna. And one thing I noticed is that all the different uh, patterns and phases sometimes will produce a multitude of different patterns that you wouldn't expect from those adults.
Hmm.
Like I'd breed a pair of Blair's phase and maybe one Alterna morph would pop out. So that led me to believe that those pattern variations in Alterna exist in all of them, but it's more prevalent in one area over another.
Yeah.
But under the certain conditions, all those different phases come out eventually.
Yes, sir. Yeah. What, I mean, this is kind of what do you think the amount of hybridization we see naturally in these different intergrade areas between milk snakes and whatever the proto alterna is? How much of that do you think plays a factor in kind of Blair's and what we're seeing?
Well, I'd have to say not much because I only know of a few possible hybrids that have been collected in the wild. I haven't heard of any areas that you know um, produce hybrids frequently.
Yeah.
So I would have to say that that's just a real rarity.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, that's always just kind of been a little thing in the back of my mind, right? Going, you see the gray bands that came out of Mexico, like the Saltillos and stuff like that,
Yeah,
and those look to very much so kind of have like a Leonis kind of vibe to them in
yeah,
their patterning. And then as you get higher up, where you're going to see more milk snakes in that region, you start to get into, oh well, that okay, Blair's phase animal, that kind of explains what I'm seeing there. And so
yeah,
I just wonder how much of that is what we're seeing in these different proto animals going, okay, you know, is Greer kind of the proto alterna, right? That'd be the closest thing, I think. And then
yeah,
we see it kind of as it expands out. You see the different animals coming into it and go, okay, this is how we got this, this, and this.
yeah. And that's possible. I mean, I've had all those animals before, but I've never been down there collecting them, and
Yeah.
I didn't really spend a lot of time studying like Greer and Theri and Mex and all that.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But I know that that's a pretty complicated complex of animals, and it could be, that's maybe like the epicenter of the whole Mexicana complex and where it began, maybe spread out from there. And maybe the ones we got up here, the Blairs and Alternaphases, are just just you know just spreading of the species,
Yes, sir.
dispersal.
Yeah. Yeah, just it's those conversations you have after hours of hunting with your partner, right? Where you're just delirious and you're going, "I wonder if this is what we're seeing," right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, getting back to like the Alternas and the Blair morphs in here in Texas. um I know for a long time people used to say, well, you only find Alternamorphs um west of Sanderson, out toward Alpine and Alpine to Waco and down, south in the Big Bend region. And then you find Blair morphs east of Sanderson, and that in the middle is kind of an intergradation. So you'll find some Blairs and some Alternas, but I found pockets here and there. like um, of some like one little pocket up in Pecos County, just the most awesome alternomorphs. I mean, they put, in my opinion, even Wacos to shame.
Oh wow.
They almost, almost all of them had that kind of light bluish gray look, and just the classic little bands. And as adults, they didn't get that big either. You know,
Hmm.
24, 28 inches was a max on the ones from this one locality that I
Yeah.
found, and just not far away, 50 miles away, I'd find nothing but Blairs in this other valley.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And that's one thing when I'm saying, hey, I think that the locality, if we're talking about, a few miles from each other, isn't as big of a deal,
Yeah,
then, we make out, where it's like, oh, this cut to this cut, I won't cross that, right? And
yeah,
and listen, I agree, right? Like if I can find animals in 10 feet of each other, I'm like, hell yeah, that's gonna
oh
be
yeah,
my
yeah,
preference there for sure. But yeah, I think that when you're starting to expand out, you are seeing different because the animals, the saltillos and stuff, that is a substantially smaller animal. Just
right,
it's a smaller head, it's a smaller, just the amount of time it takes to grow those animals
right,
to sexual maturity is so much slower than when you look at a 277 animal
right,
where you go, holy crap, this thing is half this thing's age and it's
yeah,
triple the size.
right,
You know, it's pretty interesting, kind of that. And so, yeah, I think too early on, kind of one of the early animals that made me go, oh, Waco's tanks, like holy crap, was I think I got for some reason that Pepper's Hill animal from the Alterna page back in
oh
the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
I for some reason in my mind I mixed up that animal with a Waco's tanks animal. I think there has been some pretty slate gray kind of Waco's tank animals, but that was always the thing where I was like, when I was looking for Waco's tank, that's what I wanted, a slate gray and black animal,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. I knew the guy that collected that Pepper's Hill animal.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Because I've heard some people in the past bring up that maybe he was a little fast and loose and didn't like to give out localities as much, and so that that animal might not necessarily been found in that area.
That's always a possibility. A lot of people guard their localities and
Yes,
don't
sir.
want to, say too much. But I know the guy, and I'm pretty sure that he was the one that collected it there. But
Gotcha.
I've caught some I've had some of my favorite cuts where I would find everything from light phase blares to dark alternomorphs with no orange, and just everything in between, all in the same cut over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely it's so funny, right? Listen, people say, and that's the coolest thing, especially with talking to alternate guys where they go, everybody likes their own little thing, you know?
Yeah,
And I seem to I can justify a dog looking really damn good to me. Where I go, no, it's so cool. It's
yeah,
all black. I love that. That's
yeah.
awesome. And everybody around me's going, that's the ugliest damn Alterna I have ever seen. That's terrible you found that.
Well, there's also you know some localities, and this is one reason why I really didn't. I didn't. No, I don't want to say I got bored with Wacos, but I would hatch out a clutch of Wacos, and majority of them all look the same. I'd have a clutch of 10, and they'd all be narrow banded alternomorphs with an occasional one, like I said, would have some orange, but not that often. Most often they all look the same.
Mhm.
Um, so I tend to like to hunt areas. That's why I kind of stuck to that middle part of the range, like Terrell, Pecos, Crockett counties, because it was more of a mixed bag. You never knew what you were going to, if you found an alterna, there was no guarantee what it was going to look like.
Yeah.
And that made it more fun.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And that makes sense. What so you like sticking in the middle? What were some of any good stories that stick out in your head of some of those trips besides your first and second alterna or
Oh,
any
I got all kind of stories. Uh, Once I was hunting Pecos County one night up in FM 2886, because I looked at do you remember kingsnake.com had an alterna section in there,
Yes, sir.
and it listed all kinds of records all over the region.
Yes, sir.
And there
Early
was
eye
this,
naturalist.
huh?
I said early eye naturalist. I've spent more time as a little kid going through that and just
Yeah.
clicking on the same one again and looking at that
Oh
little
yeah. Well,
crappily
I used to,
hand-drawn map.
when I started going out there a lot, I studied a lot of those localities just to decide where I wanted to go. And that's when I started also wanting to find more, obscure localities. And I remember seeing this one. It was a really crappy looking snake. It was just kind of a medium to dark phase blares that didn't have really nice orange or nothing. But the locality was interesting. It was this only had one picture, and they didn't have any collecting information on it. They didn't even know who had collected it. It was just an old picture, and it was claimed to be from FM 2886. So I drove that road one night on my way down from Fort Worth, and just looking to see where the cuts were, and I found this one nice cut. In fact, that was the night I found that milk snake I thought was a coral snake.
Gotcha.
And so that got me pumped right there. But this beautiful cut. So I started hunting this cut because I figured that had to be where this one gray band came from. And I hunted it um, a lot for several years, actually. Never found anything but, like Pictogaster, Lep, blacktails, atrox, stuff like that, subox. But there's a fella, what the hell's his name? Smith, out of California. I can't remember his first name. Darn it. I should know it. I'm getting old. But him and I hunted that cut, I mean, religiously for a couple of years. And I mean, we pounded it hard. And never found anything. Finally, he got tired of hunting that cut, and he started hunting more out in about the Wacos and the Guads and out further west. So I went back up there one night with another friend of mine, a guy named Matt Myers, and we were cruising that cut. Well, no, we walked it several times, and then we got tired. It was getting late. It was like about 11 or so, and we'd hit it since about 8:30. We walked up and down the cut, nothing.
Yes, sir.
So we got back in my car, and I said, "Hey, let's just cruise one time. Just cruise up and down the cut one time. You shine out one side, I'll shine out the other." Okay. So we're going along, and I look up, and sometimes these cracks have like shadows, depending on the light, if there's a moon out or whatever. And so the crack, it's hard to tell. And I was looking up the top of this cut about 30 feet up, and I couldn't tell if it was a shadow from the crack in the rock or could it be a snake. So I stopped. I got my window rolled down, and I'm looking and looking. And my buddy said, "What are you looking at?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure." And so he leans across me too and shines his light up to him. Right about that time, that thing moved. Holy shit. We went from like being tired and ready to go back, into town
Yeah.
and crash to like, full panic mode. Park the car, put it in park, jump out, and this thing's like 30 feet up. And I had an extension pole. It was a golf ball retriever. You know what those are?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I had one that I kind of modified into a hook at the end of it. And but it only went up it was like a 9-foot pole, and then I'm not really tall, so with my arm fully extended I can reach up about 7 feet. So then the 9-foot, they gave me about a 16-foot reach, and it wasn't near enough. So I thought, crap. I says, okay, man, I'm going to start climbing this cut. And I wasn't all that young at that point either. I mean, this was like, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe, and so what would that put me at 55 or almost pushing 60, So I'm thinking, man, I got to get that snake. And by this time we could get the light on it. We could see it was a beautiful light phase. And this was that cut that nobody had ever collected on except that one weird picture that was in that thing. So I had to have that snake. So I'm trying to climb up this cut, and I grab a portion of rock that was poking out of the cut, thinking it was all part of that cut. And that thing came loose, and I went over backwards. I fell about, I don't know, 6 or 8 feet right onto this broken rocks and cactus. I mean, I thought, well, I later found out I broke my ankle years later,
Oh
I was I was having pain in my ankle, and I went to the podiatrist. They X-rayed it. They said, "You got a broken ankle here."
wow.
I said, "No shit." They said, "When did you do that?" I says, "I don't know." So the only thing I could figure was that night because man, I got black and blue, and I couldn't walk. I couldn't even get up off the ground. My buddy had to lift, help me stand up. And so there's, then we look up, and that snake is slowly, crawling around up there, and then it disappeared into a crack. I thought, oh crap. And then soon, a couple seconds later, it popped back out again. So, oh man, we got to get that snake. So I start climbing. I says, listen, he wanted to go up the cut and come across the top and try to catch it. And I says, it was a really long cut. I says, by the time you get all the way down, there's half a mile, turn around and walk all the way back up, that snake's going to be gone. And even then, I've done it before. It's very hard to see over the top of these edges where, there could be a snake.
Yeah,
It's
it's a different
difficult
perspective
angle.
completely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I says, we need to just try to get it. I says, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try to climb back up this cut, and you're going to push me up. So I start climbing up, and he puts his hands on my ass and starts pushing me up. And he's a big, tall construction worker guy. So he is strong, and he was tall. So he said, okay, we're never going to speak of this. Okay. Don't worry. As long as we catch a snake, we're good. So he pushes me up there, and I'm fully, I'm way up this cut, I don't know, 10 feet. And I got this pole, and I'm reaching up there. And of course, the end of the pole is kind of wiggling, so it's hard to control. And I'm barely getting to where I could reach this thing. And I touched it, and it went into like hyperdrive and into a crack. I thought, crap. And then a couple seconds later, it came back out again. So this time I just did a Hail Mary. I just swooped it. I just took this thing, and I aimed the hook toward it, and I reached way back, and I swooped down.
Michael Jordan that.
And I got that, and it fell down on my shoulder and kind of crawled back down my body down my buddy who was holding me up onto the ground, and we caught it. And it was, I sent you a picture, I think, of that cut and me standing there, and I looked pretty bad because I just fallen off that cut.
Yes,
and I'm holding that snake. And I sent you a picture of that. But
yes, sir. I'll put that up at this time.
Oh man, it was great. I mean, I was so thrilled. I mean, I didn't feel the pain in my ankle anymore or nothing. But the next day, of course, my ankle's swollen up and black and blue, and it's all cut up from the rocks and everything else. But boy, I had this Alterna.
Hey, that's all that matters. That's all that matters.
And I'll tell you one other quick story, and then I'll stop with the stories. But because a lot of times, these times when you find Alterna, there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, you don't go out there and hunt for 10 days and then you're guaranteed to catch one.
That is true.
You can hunt for years. I met guys that hunted 20 years and never found one.
Yeah.
And then I knew other people that found them all the time. So my daughters were down at Padre Islands having some big reunion party with their friends or something down there, and they invited me to come down there and spend a day or two. So I thought, okay. So I drove down to Padre Islands, and of course they're young adults are all wanting to party and drink beer and run around the beach, and that just wasn't my scene. But anyways, I went down there and visited with them, and then my younger daughter wanted to head back. She had to get back into town, and she knew I was heading back the next day. She says, well, let me ride back with you. I said, okay. And I said, well, let's just swing through Sanderson on the way back, and we'll just stay one night and hunt, and then head back home. So we pull into Sanderson, from Padre Islands that day, and we go out that night to 3 miles west of Sanderson. It was the closest cut, or at least closest cut that I wanted to hunt. So we get out, and we're walking along the cut, and it's like about 9 o'clock, and here's this little dark phase Alterna smack right in the middle of this cut. Great. Grabbed it, looked at it, got all excited, took an in situ of it. I think I might have sent you a picture of it. Bagged it, and then we walked a little bit further and found another along the base of the cut, right at the end of the cut, right at the very end. There's another one. Bagged it. 10:30. We were back in the motel looking at these snakes, and my daughter saying, Dad, I thought you told me it was hard to find these things.
And I'm like, lucky charm.
I'm saying, go figure, I mean, it's just weird. But that was a fun memory.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And then over the years, did you notice any difference in size of Alterna that you were collecting or seeing
Well, that's
other people
that's the
collect?
interesting question because other people have brought that up too, because they were thinking that all the big ones are getting collected, and we're just seeing a lot of this, the subadults. But the thing is, if you're seeing subadults, they had to come from somewhere. They
Yeah.
had to come from eggs, which came from big adults.
Yes.
So um, I didn't, and plus I related that story to you about the geckos,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
and so I just I don't think that there's a collecting bias like we've over collected the adults, because even the last few times I've been out there, I found adults. It just depends on where I went and you know what I found, but I
Yeah.
would
And
still occasionally find nice big ones.
yeah. Yeah, and I think over time of kind of my first alternate I ever found was a Juneau Road animal that was a mature male. And then within that same trip, I found a Sanderson animal that was, a neonate animal. And so I was kind of in the middle, but talking to my buddies over time, you hear about them finding animals that were larger animals. And I don't think that that's yeah, I don't think there's much validity to that, unfortunately. No, or not unfortunately, I guess
Yeah,
fortunately, you know.
it's possible that there's some like really popular places, and I know around Sanderson there's a few cuts that are close to Sanderson that a lot of people hunt, and it's possible that some of those could have some impact um, that way.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, they still, even if you're finding sub adults, they had to come from adults, so there's still got to be adults out there.
Yeah, which would get back to what we were talking about earlier, where we see, that these animals are spreading out, and you see that clutch kind of divide, and so these animals are spreading out and
Yeah,
finding their own popularity, or their own spots,
right.
But and while I don't think that that's not a factor, but maybe it is a little bit more random, as we said here, as humans, and we try to make sense of everything. Maybe it is a little bit more random and a mix of all of those things. Because
Yeah,
yeah, you see a lot of decent sized animals collected.
yeah,
Buddy of mine's gotten lucky over the last couple of years, and I think the last 3 years he's found two, and they were all decent sized animals, breeding size for sure.
yeah.
So you see that kind of spread coming out. So I don't know. Maybe there's not as much. Maybe we don't have as much figured out as we wish we did. I know we're always
Well,
trying to justify it.
it's fun to like hypothesize about all this stuff, especially once you get a little bit of information. Um, and but like I say, you don't ever know absolutely for sure about some of these things, but it is fun to just hypothesize.
Yeah. And so one thing that I think is very cool is that passing it on to the next generation, right? And so some of the pictures that you sent me kind of before we started were you going out with your kids,
Yeah,
and the story you just told us about going out with your daughter. So
yeah.
I kind of took from that maybe that was her first time going out. When did you first take any of your
Um,
children going out, and what was that
well, they've
like?
been, they've they've gone with me everywhere since they were born, snake hunting and fishing and all that kind of stuff. So I don't recall if that was her first time hunting for gray bands or not. It
Gotcha.
might have
Okay.
been her first time to Sanderson,
All right.
but my kids have all gone out with me several times out there.
Yes, sir. Does it seem like any of them have the bug where they're going to be little alterna hunting nuts, or
No, not
they
really.
kind
I
of go?
think I think I pretty well cured them. You know,
Maybe it's for the best.
yeah, yeah, they saw all the trials and tribulations I've been through. Now, my oldest son, he's just lately has been expressing an interest in having some animals, maybe some different reptiles. He's familiar with a lot of different stuff, so he's thought about having like I think chameleons, setting up a nice chameleon, a terrarium in his living room or something, and um, Also, he's expressed an interest in getting a parrot. I have parrots, so he's thought about doing that, but hasn't yet because he's the situation. He's just got two, young children, and he's just not quite ready to. He's got a lot of fatherly duties and things, so he's trying to.
Understandable.
But he's talking about it, so he might. But no, but I've always made a point of anybody that has an interest in these things. I've always been free to, share my information with them freely. I will say there's some people that don't. They want to keep everything like a trade secret. But I think that it's important to pass on what information for generations to come, because that's what perpetuates the interest.
Yes, sir. 100%. 100%. Yeah. If it wasn't kind of what we first started talking about, if it wasn't for someone willing to share with me, and even though they might be very private people, I was lucky enough to get the nod and get
Yeah,
to start to herp with those people, and it completely changed my life and
yeah.
the
It's like my
trajectory
buddy
of
I
it.
was telling you about, David Jakes, that first time that the first one to show me gray bands. I mean, this guy, he was in his mid-20s, single, always had good-looking girlfriends. Every time I go over to his house, he had a different girl over there. He'd be drinking Bloody Marys at 10 in the morning and just having a good time. He had a good job, made good money, had a great snake collection. And I mean, he didn't have to spend time with some 12-year-old kid,
Yeah.
but he did take the time, to help me along. And, I could always call him and get advice on how to do stuff and keep whatever animals I had. And then he, like I say, he took me out there road driving several times. And then we stayed, friends all these years.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it wasn't for him, and he, like I said, he didn't, he was living a great life. He didn't have to stop and, you know, tell snake stories to some 12-year-old.
Yes, sir.
But
Yeah.
but he did, and that helped me along.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Who knows the path that our lives would have taken if it
And then
wasn't for
meeting
that
people,
person doing
yeah,
that.
and then meeting people like um, John Hollister. He helped me a lot. For several years, I would go out there and hunt with him for a long time, and he taught me a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like that was something that he was doing. You know what I mean? And that he it just the common thread, you know what I mean? For me
Yeah,
to randomly for the most part be speaking about this and then kind of go like, "Oh, yeah, I know that I didn't herp with him, but if it wasn't for those people that he taught teaching me, I wouldn't be sat here talking to you." So,
yeah, yeah,
it's very interesting those little who knows where the decision you make in your life, and when that kid comes up to you at the herp show, or the little neighbor kid is interested in what you're doing,
yeah.
to take the time to sit there and educate that person. You don't know what that does for that person.
Exactly.
I think that's important to remember. I think as we get more into this, we begin to be kind of jaded in our opinions, and while I agree, I'm definitely guilty of it. Where there's certain things where I don't necessarily want to bring them up or talk about them because it took me 10 years to find my first alterna, and I don't, I want people to enjoy doing it, but I want you to put in the work because
Yeah,
after 10 years, when you find the first one, damn, I don't know if I would have found the first one, my first trip, would I still feel the same way? Maybe I would, but put in the work, figure it out, and it's well worth it.
yeah.
Once you do achieve that goal.
Oh, yeah.
Well, excellent. What kind of what's I know that over the time you've kind of reduced some of your collection and kind of changed your focus. What are you working on nowadays? What are you excited about? How has it changed over time?
Well, um, honestly, I mean, the amount of work involved. I had a pretty good sized collection of animals, and with colubrids, there's work you got to do almost year round. You know, um, Even when you brumate your stuff, you still got to go in there and check them and make sure they're okay and they got water. And if you're raising any babies, you might not be brumating them, so you're keeping them warmer and having to feed them through the winter. And then springtime, you're pairing stuff up and getting egg boxes ready and then incubating and all that stuff and hatching out. And by the summertime, you got 300 baby snakes. It's a lot of work, and I just I got tired of going to the shows, to be honest with you. So I had didn't have like an avenue. I mean, I could sell a lot of stuff uh, on the internet, um, but I don't know. I just kind of got tired of that whole deal. So I didn't. Let me see. How can I say this? If I didn't want to sell them anymore, then I really shouldn't be breeding them anymore because
Mm,
that just makes work.
yeah.
So I just made the decision that I just want to, I'm retired, and I just want to have more time um, to have, leisure time.
Yes, sir.
So I just cut way back. I thought, well, I'll get rid of all the stuff that I was breeding to sell at shows because I'm not going to do shows anymore. I never did really like the shows. There's a lot of work to get involved, packing your stuff up and then going to these shows. And then, like you say, sometimes you just get disappointed because you bring all your best stuff to the show, everything. And people don't realize you got this little 8-inch gray band, but you spent countless hours trying to get him over on pinkies
Yeah.
before you could sell him at the show because I'd never sold anything at a show that wasn't eating pinkies.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense, especially for the pet trade, because
Yeah, I didn't want
it's a
people to have
different.
trouble with them because then they get a bad taste in their mouth. So I would always sell the ones that were eating good, and that way they'd want more.
Yes, sir.
But they, a lot of people didn't understand or appreciate all the time involved in getting that stuff done. And I've also got parrots. I got 7 parrots, and they keep me pretty busy. And so what I've done was I've just decided to cut back to animals that I was never successful breeding because I
Okay.
like the challenge.
Yes, sir.
So I kept my Gila monsters, beaded lizards, and indigo snakes.
Okay. Okay. Very cool.
And since then, I've finally hatched out some Gila monsters last year and beaded lizards. Um, I'm still working on uh, my indigos. I've gotten infertile eggs, and I think they were just young, too, maybe a little bit too young. So I'm looking forward to this year, maybe having better luck. And then I've got some beaded lizards that are a little bit more rare. They're Alvarezi, the black beadeds from down south near, uh, not Colombia. Oh, hell. What's the, oh, I can't think of the name of the country just south of Mexico there.
If I,
Guatemala.
okay.
Guatemala.
Okay. Good.
So
I'm
the
glad you
way,
got that, because if I tried to do that, it was about to be embarrassing. I was like, oh.
well, I struggle. Sometimes I struggle with things like names and things, and I think, God,
Yes,
is it
sir.
because I'm getting old or is it just, I just struggle with them?
Yeah.
But,
Well, I don't have that excuse. I just struggle. So,
so I got some Alvarezi beaded lizards from down there, and they're really cool. I've had infertile eggs. I haven't had any good eggs yet, so I'm kind of still working at that. And it's just a small amount of both of those different animals. You know, it doesn't take me, like an hour a week to feed them.
yeah.
And then, I clean cages, every so often too, but that's not a big deal either. I don't have that many.
Yeah. No, especially over time, I think that early on with keepers, it's not spoken about too much, but burnout. And it's been the downfall of many a good collection is just people's burnout.
Yeah.
And I think that when you realize that you're getting to that point, or not even burnt out yet, but before you even get to that point, kind of being
Well,
able to rationalize that with yourself and go, you know what, I'm going to step back and this and that, especially with the life changes where, hey, it's time to
yeah.
retire. Let's hang out. Let's chill. I appreciate it. I like it.
Well, and what you said is exactly what went through my mind at the making that decision. I wanted to. It's kind of like you want to stop when you're at the top.
Yeah.
Not when you're beaten down to where you're pissed off.
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah.
I was still, had a great collection, got a lot of good animals, still producing, still doing good. But I thought it was time. Time to cut back and let them go. And it's better to go out when, I still have good memories about everything,
Yes, sir.
you know,
For sure.
and I'll probably still go hunting out there. I'm going to go, I had a series of uh, medical problems for about 3 years
Mm.
and finally got kind of halfway healed up. So I'm going to probably go out this summer, I think.
Awesome. Awesome.
I
Well,
won't
very
keep
good.
anything. I'll just be going out there just for the fun of it, see if I go poking around and take some pictures.
I think that's the best part. You know what I mean? When you get to the point where you're just sat there and there's no stakes on the table, and it's just about the experience and soaking that in. You know,
Well, the
so
last several times I went out there, I actually released some of my prior captive animals, some wild caught animals back at the original locality.
yeah.
I've released, I don't know, half a dozen or more adults. Um, and I found some that I didn't collect. I just took pictures of them, and I found one that I'd found 2 years in a row.
Well,
That was
yeah,
neat.
yeah, and that's I think that's a beautiful spot to be in the hobby, right? And
Yeah,
especially in the hobby of just field herping, where it's just fun to see it move it. And
yeah.
I think with most species, I think that's definitely it's very cool to just watch a suboc live its life in the little section that I got to sit in front of it,
Oh
and I
yeah,
happened to be in the right spot at the right time to see it
oh
do it.
yeah.
You know,
Talking about subocs. I mean, I remember one night I just followed one. It was a real big one. It was like about a 5 footer,
uh,
and it was hunting. Obviously, it was either hunting or looking for a mate or something. But it was crawling kind of parallel along a cut about 6 or 8 feet up, and so I just kind of walking along and watching it and watching him poke around, and I was standing far enough away that I wasn't impeding his movement or anything, and so it was just kind of neat. It's fun to watch.
before we start to wind down here, I think that's something good, and I think something that comes up where a lot of people like suboc, and I think it's an underappreciated species for sure,
Oh, they're
for
cool.
so
Yeah.
many reasons. Have you ever found a blonde? Anything stand out, or just any good suboc
No,
stories in general?
um, I've hunted back in the '80s. I hunted Big Ben. Not a lot, but fair amount. Big Ben, and the Studi Butte, Lahidas, and the Christmas, and River Road, and all those places.
Oh,
And but I never found a blonde. And back in those days, they were seemed to be more restricted to just along somewhere near Lahidas, and but since then, I've heard of them being found in a lot wider range.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Definitely early on, it seems like they were. People said you could only find them in this little stretch of road,
yeah,
and seems to not be the case.
no, um,
But also, too, it makes sense. You know what I mean? That color mutation, uh, I think it would almost benefit the animal more so than the normal animal because it does blend in with that limestone
oh
so
yeah,
well.
that faded out pattern looks
Yeah,
way more camouflaged, like for that area
yeah,
than
yeah. It makes perfect sense for us to see more blondes over time. Where I
yeah.
feel like maybe in the next 1,000 years, if this thing is still floating, you know, I bet the normal looking animal is a Blair's. What am I talking about? Is a blonde animal,
Yeah.
and the normal phase is whatever mutation they would deem it at
Well,
that point.
it might be. I mean, I read a study one time years ago about moths in some little village in England somewhere. Um,
Turning
that
black over time.
yeah, because they were white originally,
Is there?
and when they originally built a lot of the homes, they were built out of like white plaster. So these moths were camouflaged when they'd land on the buildings, and
Is
the
there?
birds couldn't pick them off.
Yeah.
Well, they started developing coal mines in the village there or nearby, and started getting coal dust in the air, and it started turning the walls gray.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Yeah.
then the birds could pick off the white ones easy
Yeah.
because they see them, but occasionally a dark one would pop out of the mix, and those took over. And now the whole populations are all dark ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
that makes sense.
so that's entirely possible with the blonde subox. Maybe it's more of a natural protective coloration, and that they're just gradually gonna take over maybe.
Yes, sir. Yeah, for sure.
But I found a lot of subox out there. I never kept any, but I always liked finding them.
Oh yeah. That's definitely something that yeah, I like subuck. I keep quite a few subuck, and I think that's a very, very cool species. And
Oh yeah, I
you
found some
know,
nice ones. Some really nice ones with the really deep yellow color and distinct H patterns. And um, what cool thing about them too is their scales reflect light really good.
hmm
So I mean, I remember one night coming down 90. I was hauling ass trying to get out to somewhere out west and coming down a hill, and I saw just a little ribbon of a snake out in the highway. I mean, like 100 yards ahead of me at least, but I could immediately see it was a snake. When my lights hit it, it looked like a fluorescent piece of ribbon.
yes.
It was a suboc.
Oh yeah. Have you ever found a subuck on Juno?
Um, I'm trying to think. I don't know. I found an indigo on Juno.
Oh really?
Yeah. Um, Pictogaster. Beards. I found a Beards on Juno.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
But I was hunting Juno early in the early days.
Yeah.
But they had these Goodyear tire testers.
Yep. They're
And
still out there.
they're still out there.
Yeah.
Ah, and I mean, the last couple times I hunted out there, I would just find one DOR after another. And it got so discouraging. I just left. I never went back. I never hunted Juno again.
Yes.
Because
It's so funny. I think that maybe it's similar to racers where, early on, even over in San Antonio, if I see a snake dead in the road in the middle of the day, I go, well, that's a racer. And if I stop to look at its carcass, it's usually a racer.
yeah.
And that's been I have found one live Baird's. But my snake hunting partner for I think 10 years had a stretch of watching Baird's rat snakes get ran over in front of him.
Oh,
And my first Baird's, which was one of my first West Texas animals ever when I was a kid, was a Baird's rat snake. And
huh.
so that got me going interested in West Texas. It was a large animal someone brought into the pet shop, and my boss said, "Hey man, I know you don't have these, but this is something that I think you should keep. It's super cool. Check this out." It ended up being like a 68-inch female Baird's that it
Wow.
was one of the prettiest animals I'd ever seen. And I've been trying to find that animal again. But yeah, again, the first Baird's I ever saw in the wild, I let a truck pass me as I was trying to get up to the S curves, and
Yeah.
they came around, and of course, what did they roll? A nice, big, beautiful transition, into its adult color Baird's,
Yeah.
and you know,
Huh.
yep. But that was my buddy's fourth Baird's to see rolled in his life. Was that one, and no
Wow.
live ones.
Well, I've been real fortunate with Beards. I found a lot of them. Never kept any, but I just take pictures and let them go. But I found a lot in Crockett County, um, Pecos County, um, Davis County. Found some nice ones, just never kept any.
Yeah. I will say at this point, as much as I love Alterna and Alterna, like I said, I'm an Alterna hunter over everything else.
Yeah.
But finding a Baird's, I think would I like I said, that was the first snake that ever got me into the idea of herping Texas was a Blair's. I don't know why I keep saying that. Was a Baird's animal,
Right.
and just completely what a cool animal. But again, because it starts off looking like a Texas rat snake or anything else, I think it's very underestimated for sure.
Yeah. No, they're pretty cool. And, all that stuff out there I really like, but I guess I became an Alterna snob at an early age, to where I was so focused on Alterna. That's all I wanted,
Yes, sir.
you
Yep.
know.
Completely understandable.
And
I get it.
I didn't start getting into a lot of the other milk snakes until I started doing the shows. And I wanted to have something else on my table than just gray bands.
Yep.
Um, because, I knew not everybody appreciated or liked gray bands that much, you know. So
Understood.
I wanted to have other stuff. So I bred a lot of milk snakes too.
Yes, sir.
But that was about it. Even all the years that I hunted out in West Texas, um, The only snake I ever brought home was Alterna.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, excellent. Excellent. Well, hey, I've already taken us past our time that I said to you, and I was a little late today, so I appreciate you being patient with me, and
Yeah,
thank you
no
so
problem.
much. I feel like I could keep talking to you for multiple more hours moving forward, so it's been very fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, no, yeah, I enjoyed it too. This was good. I like, dumping some of these stories.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so
So,
much, and
welcome.
hopefully that this is something that people take the time to listen to and
Yeah.
understand that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for many people and the people taking the time with myself and Mr. Tennyson to get us to the point, and now we get the opportunity and this unique time to sit here and speak with him and keep this saved for the future moving forward. So, thank you so much for your time tonight. And at the end here, don't hang up. And we'll let that recording up there.
Okay.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Talk to
All
you
right.
later.
Yes, sir.
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.